Welcome to the Humanizing Work Show.
Today's episode describes how a Scrum team's Daily Scrum, or Daily Standup if you like, is a snapshot into the overall health of a team.
Before we jump into today's episode, though, we want to help you with whatever challenges are most frustrating you right now. If you're feeling stuck on something, whether that's trying to take a more human-centric approach to your work, trying to make your product or your business outcomes better, or if you've just got a more tactical process-related question, let us know about it. Send us an email at mailbag@humanizingwork.com with a few details about the situation, and we'll share how we might think through your challenge right here on the Humanizing Work Show.
And just a quick reminder to rate and review the Humanizing Work Show in your podcast app, or if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel and like and share today's episode if you find it valuable to you. Your help spreading the word is super meaningful to us.
And if you want to get access to more content we produce, not just the show, you can sign up for our free newsletter where we share one key idea every week. Sign up at humanizingwork.com/HWnews. When I was leading Adobe's Agile transformation, I used to do an annual survey that I sent to all the teams that had adopted Scrum. And I had two main questions I was curious about that caused me to start sending out this survey. First question, are people actually using Scrum? I had taught them about this stuff. Do they actually use it? And the second question, probably even more important, is if they're using it, is it working for them? So this survey had two sections. One that assessed whether that person's team was actually using Scrum, with questions around specific Scrum practices and some additional other Agile techniques beyond Scrum. And then another set of questions around whether the person's team likes Scrum and they were getting some benefit from it. And then as I gathered more data, I started looking for some correlations between specific parts of Scrum and whether people thought it worked well for them. The interesting thing that stood out to me was that the strongest correlation I found between a positive implementation or perception of Scrum and any specific Scrum practice was the Daily Scrum meeting. When people reported that the Daily Scrum was an effective use of their time, they were almost certain to also report that they liked Scrum, and Scrum seemed to work well for their team. Now, I don't think this means that if we just facilitated the Daily Scrum better, that the rest of Scrum would magically fall into place. To say it another way, the relationship between a good Daily Scrum and Scrum working well wasn't causal, it was correlated. The Daily Scrum was the proverbial canary in the coal mine, a quick, lightweight glimpse into the overall health of the broader system around that team. Healthy teams rarely have bad Daily Scrums, and bad Daily Scrums rarely happen on healthy teams. If your Daily Scrum feels like a waste of time, that's probably not your biggest problem.
Yeah, I had the same realization from the other direction. I used to do a lot of in-person coaching with teams that I'd trained or a colleague had trained. I discovered that just from watching a 15-minute Daily Scrum, I would generate hypotheses about the overall health and effectiveness of that team that would inevitably be confirmed by more in-depth coaching. Eventually, this pattern became so strong that I would prefer to start working with a team I was coaching by observing a Daily Scrum rather than hearing a Scrum Master's or manager's take on how things were going. They'd want to tell me what was going on, and I would often stop them and say, hold up, let me observe a Daily Scrum, get my own feel for what's going on with the team, and then we'll talk about it. So let me share some of the things that I would be watching for once I got more intentional about this, and then the larger things that they often correlated to. And you can use that to think about, what would I see on my own team in our daily meetings? First thing, how does the product owner interact with the rest of the team? Sometimes that's as simple as, does the product owner even come to the Daily Scrum? When they come to the Daily Scrum, do they look like a member of a team collaborating around the same kind of problem? Or do they look like somebody who's giving orders to the team or checking in on status? Does the product owner plan with other team members how they're going to collaborate that day around items in the current sprint or items on the backlog that need refinement? So you could tell a lot about that relationship just in a few minutes. Similarly, how does the Scrum Master interact with the rest of the team? Are they the person who seems to be just in charge of the process, or the project manager keeping track of status of things? Or do they feel like somebody who's really there almost behind the scenes helping things go well on the team and helping work flow smoothly? Is there a sense of the team working towards a shared commitment? And this shows up in how the team talks about the work. Are they talking about larger things they're trying to accomplish together and collaborating around? Or is each person just reporting how busy they are on their individual tasks? By the way, the default approach to the daily scrum that many teams often do, where each person reports on yesterday, today, and impediments, often moves away from this sense of a shared commitment. So we often suggest focusing on the work itself rather than individual tasks. And we talk about that in our Daily Scrum episode that we'll mention later. Is the team often waiting for others outside the team to meet their commitments? Yeah, you'll find out in the Daily Scrum, things get blocked waiting on outside dependencies. This may tell you something about whether the team even has the right skills on it. How much does the sprint backlog get interrupted? Now, this one's a little nuanced. A team that has no interruptions might be healthy, or they might just be ignoring change. There are genuine emergencies they need to address, and they keep them away, which may not be healthy. But you also see teams that are completely overwhelmed with interruptions and changes. And so I want to see some healthy amount of, yeah, things change, the world is complex and unpredictable, but we're still focusing on our core shared commitment. Check out our previous episode on how to deal with interruptions on a Scrum team if you have a mix of planned work and emergent interruption kind of work, by the way. Do people ask for and offer help? This is a signal about how much team members trust each other and how much they have a sense of we're in this together and we need to work together on it. If people say, I'm stuck on this thing, but I'm going to keep working on it. Or if they don't even bring it up, they say, yeah, I've been stuck on that for a few days. They're probably not high trust, high safety, high collaboration. If instead it's, yeah, I'm starting to get stuck on that. Can somebody work with me right away this morning to get me unstuck? That feels like a team that's working together on something. A couple more. Does the plan change? This turned out to be one of the key indicators of a healthy daily scrum and often a healthy team. If everyone shows up with a plan for what they're going to do for the day, they report on the plan, and they go do the thing they originally planned, you didn't really need a meeting. But if the team gets together, surfaces the shared things that they've learned over the last day, and then together uses that information to plan the best day today, that feels like a team that's collaborating around complex problems. Now, the plan doesn't need to get blown up every day, but I want to see some amount of we're responding to things that are emerging on our team, and our daily scrum is really based on what we know now. How do we make today matter? And then finally, the last thing, I was watching to see if there is a healthy balance of things we need to discuss and decide together as a whole team versus things we can discuss smaller groups to address. You often end up with a really long daily scrum meeting if everyone feels like they need to be involved in the details of everything, and that's not always healthy on a team. So some amount of we raise an issue and then 2 or 3 people say, we'll take that on, and everyone else trusts them to do it, is pretty healthy on a team, especially if day to day those groups are kind of dynamic and different people are working together.
Yeah, Richard, I agree with all of those. And it reminded me of an experience I had one time. So I had done, when I was working at Adobe, a lot of training for some really great teams in India, in the Noida campus in India. And one of those teams I had trained a few years prior to this visit that I was on in India. And I remember the Scrum Master saying, "Hey, Peter, welcome back. It's great to see you. It's been a couple of years. Would you mind coming and giving some coaching to our team while you're here?" And I did. It's funny, we had never talked about this before, but I took the exact same approach. I said, "Well, when's your daily scrum?" And I wanted to go observe the daily scrum. And so Srinath said, "Hey, our daily scrum's at such and such time," and I was available. So I walked into this meeting area, and the daily scrum was about to start. And as people came in, they formed a circle. So they were standing in a circle for the daily scrum. And then the coolest thing I think I've ever seen in a daily scrum happen, Srinath, who was the scrum master, did not stand in the middle of the circle, which is kind of what I was expecting. Instead, he would go and stand behind the individual that was about to share, "Hey, yesterday I was working on this thing and here's how it went. And then today, I'm a little blocked on it." Like the normal report, instead of standing in the circle where that person might look at Srinath as an authority and share the report to Srinath, the Scrum Master, Srinath would stand behind that person and occasionally would even put his hand on their shoulder, like in a supportive gesture. And they would share their report, and then the next person, he would move over and stand behind them so that they couldn't report to him. And this was so cool because a lot of times, especially in cultures like kind of a traditional Indian culture, when there's any kind of sense of authority, it's really strong. And Srinath wanted to de-emphasize that in his role as a Scrum Master, that I am here to serve you. You are not here to report to me. And I thought just that simple gesture of I'm going to stand behind you so you can't look at me when you give your report, and I'm going to support you in that was really cool. And it was a great example of not only a snapshot of a very cool practice that team had adopted, but I knew Srinath, and I knew that he was very mindful about these things. And that was an example of them modifying their daily Scrum over time. You could almost imagine what the first daily Scrum was like with that team, where they were standing in a circle and everybody did report to Srinath, and he was saying, boy, how could I get them to not report to me? What if? And so it was cool to see that progress.
Along those lines, we've mostly focused here on the Daily Scrum as a team diagnostic, how the Daily Scrum tells you about the larger health of a team. But Peter's story is a nice example of how you can use the Daily Scrum and small changes in the Daily Scrum to shape larger changes in your team's health. So for more on how to facilitate a Daily Scrum that gets your team collaborating around a shared commitment, check out our Daily Scrum episode from back in January, which we'll link to in the show notes.
And please like and share this episode if you found it useful. Let us know in the comments or send us an email at mailbag@humanizingwork.com to tell us, what are you noticing as you start paying attention to your Daily Scrum, and what questions come up as you do that. Thanks for watching.